It is my great honor to welcome you to the inaugural event of our Criminology Law and Society program. This is indeed a topic that covers a great many academic disciplines and is a matter of great concern for everyone who aspires to be a citizen in this country. We are honored tonight to have as our featured presenter a man who has dedicated his professional life to the study of criminal law and most particularly to the phenomenon of wrongful convictions. John Rago is somebody who has spent over the last 2 decades or so dedicating his life to being a scholar in the criminal law field, and for at least the last 10 or 15 years focusing on this incredible phenomenon of individuals who are wrongfully convicted. I sometimes wonder why it is that a person will choose a particular field of study to call their own. Criminal law is not, as those of us who have practiced in it and have studied in it for years know, it's not a field that produces many millionaires. It's not a field that is, in fact, as I learned in my years in the law school community, it's not a discipline that is even highly regarded among certain academics in the legal field. I could never understand why that was true, to be honest with you, because, as I oftentimes said to my students, if a comet ever hit the Earth and covered us with volcanic ash and we were all wiped out, and 1,000 years or so went by and an alien civilization came down to dig us up and started to ask the question, was this a just people? I don't think they would have looked at our tax code to find that out. And I don't think they would have said, gee, what a wonderful uniform commercial code these people came up with. They must have been just. I think they would look at how we dealt with the great problems of crime and those people who are affected by crime. For every Martha Stewart who is a defendant in the criminal justice system, there are millions of people who are both defendants, victims, and witnesses, who are all the least of these in a society. And I've always believed that how just we are with respect to those people marks us as either a just or unjust society.
There's a quote out on the wall, Fred Rogers, discovering the truth about ourselves is a lifetime's work, but it is worth the effort. I was struck by that as I'm sitting out here talking with Bruce, because this is about truth. This isn't about advocacy. This isn't about conservative Republicans, liberal Democrats. It's not about anything of the sort. And when the truth suffers in our lives, whether it's in your marriage, your relationship with your children, your friends, there's something missing. And I'm not talking about deep, eternal, or biblical truth. I'm talking about truth that resonates. You know what truth is. When it is absent in your life, something is missing. And that is how my journey with this began. And I'm grateful to these 2 gentlemen here, Bruce and Kirk, for opening my eyes many years ago.
One of the most horrible things that ever happened to me was my mother passed away 5 months before the results of the DNA. But she used to write me letters, and I went to see her body in handcuffs and shackles for 5 minutes. And she would say, "Stand up, boy, because right is light. And if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything." And I remember I was in the van going back to the prison, an innocent man, and I could hear my mother's voice in my head, and it was going, "Stand up." And it got louder, and as I got closer to it, Stand up! And by the time I got back to the prison, I was straining at the chains and standing and pulling myself and smiling. I was standing up. I remember I got a Post-it note stuck in the door by a guard, and it said, "Call your attorney, it's urgent. Call your attorney." This was in April of 1993. I go to the phone and I call Bob Moore in the collect. He was my lawyer of last resort. He's a judge in D.C. And I remember he always answered these calls. You talk about good lawyers, Bruce, it's amazing. And John, this guy, he accepted every single phone call from me in collect. It must have been thousands. I threatened to call him 20 times a day if he didn't do what I asked him to. And he was screaming on the other end, "Kirk, you're innocent, man, you're innocent." I know that. When am I going to get out of here? It took a few more months, and the FBI, William Sessions, the former director of the FBI, called Ambrose, the prosecutor, in the Dawn Hamilton murder case and said, "You have an innocent man in your midst."
And these are the words in 2009 from Justice Scalia, which are a little chilling if you think about it, and I'll interpret it after we read it. This court has never held that the Constitution forbids the execution of a convicted defendant who has had a full and fair trial but is later able to convince a habeas court that he is, quote, actually, close quote, innocent. Quite to the contrary, we have repeatedly left that question unresolved, while expressing considerable doubt that any claim based on alleged actual innocence is constitutionally cognizable. What that means is this: the United States government or any state government could sentence someone to death who is factually or actually innocent, and that would not represent a constitutional error. I said this to my 11-year-old son, John Henry, some time ago, and I said, "Does that make sense to you?" And I changed the explanation slightly differently, and he said, "No." He views the Constitution as something that is good. And yet my characterization, and I don't think I'm mischaracterizing these words, it doesn't come across as good. Does that make you angry, or at least make you think? By extension, let me tell you what this means. If I murder my wife, and I never would, I love her to death, but let me use Ann as an example. Some nights I know she'd like to murder me. If I murdered my wife, and I had a completely fair trial, and I'm sitting on death row, and they're ready to inject me with poison and toxins, and my wife walks up to the judge and says, "I'm not dead," Justice Scalia logically would have to say, that's a tough break, because he had a fair trial. There's no other way to get around that. This man, our guest tonight, my dear friend Kirk Bloodsworth, was one of these 17 individuals. In fact, Kirk was the first person on death row in the United States to be exonerated in 1993 from the state of Maryland. I won't dare tell his story, though I know it intimately well. But I can assure you that his middle name is aptly noble, because his effort was done by his grit, by his gut, by his faith. He turned to Catholicism while he was in prison. He never lost faith when everyone else around him had, and Kirk is truly an American hero as far as I'm concerned, and many others.
I have to tell you that we must stand up for life, and the commission that John and Bruce and everybody has advocated here in the state, you must stand up for what is right. And I have to tell you, we have to support these programs that John needs to do, because you don't need an innocent man being executed in your state or an innocent man being held in prison. And let me tell you something. In 2004, it was 10 years later, I was sitting in my office again, and the phone rang. And it was the prosecutor, the woman who called me a monster, on the other end, and said, "We have an update on the Hamilton murder case, and we need to talk to you, but I can't tell you over the phone." So I met her at the Burger King, And she told me the real killer of Dawn Hamilton was Kimberly Shea Ruffner. And he was not 6'5". He was 5'6" and 160 pounds. And he slept right there in a tier for me for 5 years. He pled guilty to her murder. And now, this precious little 9-year-old little girl named Dawn Hamilton can finally get justice.
I was very happy that earlier tonight at dinner, in the typical tradition of Benedictine generosity and goodwill, we presented each of these gentlemen a small bag that contained Saint Vincent bread and coffee and everything else. But there was one particular present that I think everybody at dinner was struck by when Kirk opened it. It was a Christmas tree ornament from Saint Vincent this year. And he said that's the first Christmas tree ornament he has received since he has been released from prison. Congratulations for that. Congratulations for that, and welcome home. And finally, my dear friend John Rago is a guy who, and if you've ever been part of a commission, you know how difficult it is to do the work. He has labored in this field for a long period of time, and to my knowledge, nobody has ever said thank you to him. That's an injustice, too. Not the same level of injustice as happens to someone like Kirk, but it's an injustice at least that tonight we can at least do something about. And with the blessings and on behalf of Dr. Riddle, I'd like to ask John to come up. And this is about as unofficial as it can be, but who cares? I'd like to present to John a small but very sincere plaque that reads as follows: in recognition of your tireless efforts to vindicate the innocent, to hold those rightfully guilty accountable to the law, and to advance the noble pursuit of due process of law, the Saint Vincent College Criminology Law and Society Program hereby recognizes Professor John Rago as a champion of justice, awarded November the 29th, 2011.